Cult leaders. Driven by narcissism, they want to rule others. In Japan, Shoko Asahara leads the country's brightest minds into mass murder. Adolfo Constanzo uses voodoo and human sacrifice to paralyze his followers. 4 young cult members brutally murder 7 people in Los Angeles. They are followers of Charles Manson. Fueled by an overdeveloped ego, these cult leaders shaped their world in their own vision. They manipulate others to perform vicious acts. But where does the evil lie? Dr. Michael Stone of Columbia University has created a scale of evil. There are 22 levels that decode a killer's motive, method, and mind. The more heinous the crime, and the more rational the perpetrator, the higher the criminal is placed on the scale. What can Dr. Stone and his scale reveal about the mind of a cult leader? The scale distinguishes between killers whose minds are overtaken by madness and those who are in control of their actions. To place each leader on his scale, Dr. Stone examines the cruelty of their actions and the evolution of their beliefs. He begins with the case of Shoko Asahara. March 20th, 1995. The morning rush hour in Tokyo, Japan. Lethal sarin gas is released into the train system. 12 die. 5,000 are injured. The perpetrators are not common criminals. They are doctors, lawyers, scientists. All are members of the doomsday cult Aum Shinrikyo, a twisted faith preaching Armageddon. The founder of this religion is Shoko Asahara, an overweight, partially blind, middle-aged former yoga instructor. How has Asahara compelled educated citizens to commit such an evil act?
To inflict violence on such a massive scale, one must have a delusional view of the world and of his place in it. The leader of a group that carries out this violence must clearly be a master of manipulation and must be bankrupt of remorse. Mercifully, it is rare for one individual to possess both of these traits.
Asahara is born with the name Chizuo Matsumoto. He is the son of a poor craftsman. He loses most of his eyesight to infantile glaucoma, and his family sends him away to a school for the blind. He develops bully behavior, using what sight he has to intimidate his more severely disabled classmates. He becomes someone both to fear and follow. He reads science fiction and claims he will one day rule a robot kingdom. After graduating, Matsumoto applies to a prestigious Tokyo university, but is rejected. He becomes a New Age practitioner, performing acupuncture, massage, and teaching yoga. Matsumoto discovers the writings of Nostradamus, the 16th century astrologer who foretold the end of the world. Matsumoto becomes obsessed with the idea of Armageddon. He has delusions while meditating. He claims to have been charged to be a god of light and to create an army to bring about Armageddon. He believes that he will survive the apocalypse and emerge as ruler of the world. In 1987, he changes his name to Shoko Asahara. He creates a religion called Aum Shinrikyo, or Supreme Truth, and registers himself as the leader.
Asahara's visions appear to be the sign of a delusional disorder. The fact that he is a guru, yoga instructor, and therefore already in a position of authority, makes his delusions potentially more harmful to others.
Asahara lures in new followers with propaganda videos claiming he is godlike. He targets intelligent but lost souls, scientists and engineers who seek meaning in their lives. He suggests that if they follow him, they can find the path to salvation in a new world that can only be created with the destruction of this one. By 1990, Asahara has 5,000 followers. He orders the scientists to develop a wired helmet that new students wear to align their brainwaves with his, in order to better understand his thoughts. It is called the PSI, Perfect Salvation Initiation. He orders the cult to wear masks of his likeness and to parade them in solidarity.
As Asahara's disciples continue to worship him as a god, his ego is inflated and his delusions are intensified, ultimately making him even more dangerous.
But Asahara's ultimate goal is the creation of a new world through Armageddon. His scientists shift their focus to weapons of mass destruction. They set up a sarin plant. The doomsday cult is readying itself for a massive attack. (1995). Asahara orders the release of deadly poison into the Tokyo subway, killing 12 and wounding over 5,000. Asahara is disappointed with the low death toll. He and his inner circle are arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder.
Self-centered and psychopathic, Asahara revealed his general contempt for humanity by scheming to commit murders that would spark an apocalyptic war. By murdering and injuring more than 5,000 people, there was an extremely high level of evil in Asahara. His delusions, however, qualify as a form of mental illness. For that reason, I cannot place him at the highest level of my scale. Therefore, I place him at level 16, psychopaths committing multiple vicious acts with one or two extraordinarily vicious acts.
Asahara is sentenced to death and is currently awaiting execution. But what was the cause of Asahara's delusions? And why do many cult leaders believe they have a direct line to the gods? When we return, the science behind a cult leader's mind. Many cult leaders believe they have spoken with God and have been given divine wisdom that provides them with a rare understanding of the world. Shoko Asahara experienced such delusions. He claims to have heard a deity charge him with orders to carry out Armageddon. Laurentian University neuroanatomist Michael Persinger believes he has found an explanation for this phenomenon.
We now realize that all experience comes from brain activity, or even religious experiences are a product of a certain pattern of brain stimulation.
Persinger believes that when the brain's temporal lobe, the region responsible for comprehension, is overstimulated by electromagnetic activity, cerebral seizures can develop and lead to delusions. These delusions can cause individuals to believe that they've had an encounter with a god. Persinger claims that he can induce these delusions in healthy test subjects by overstimulating their temporal lobe. He does this by conducting electromagnetic fields into their brains. Using an EEG, Persinger's team can chart this mystical experience as it occurs. Brain activity increases during this time.
The common experience is the feeling of knowing, hearing your voice called, your name called, hearing knowledge being given to you. If the person personally identifies them as being God or some other deity, that's the powerful phenomenon that drives individuals.
Persinger believes that cult leaders who hear voices suffer from temporal lobe epilepsy, a condition that naturally overstimulates the brain with electromagnetic activity and causes seizures that lead to delusions in much the same way he does with his test subjects.
There's a distribution of cult leaders which are convinced that they are doing this by cosmic consent, and almost invariably they have to proselytize. They have to spread the word.
Shoko Asahara preached Armageddon. Another delusional cult leader, Adolfo Constanzo, heard the voices of gods urging him to sacrifice humans. April 1989, Matamoros, Mexico. Police exhumed 13 mutilated bodies just miles from the Texas border. One of the victims is American college student Mark Kilroy. His brain has been removed, his legs cut off. Other victims are identified. Each body shows signs of torture. Many have been decapitated. Nearby, police uncover a shed filled with remnants of black magic and human sacrifice. Inside, Mark Kilroy's brain is found stewing in a cauldron called an anganga. The owner of the shed is cult leader Adolfo Constanzo, a voodoo-worshipping drug lord who practices human sacrifice. His cult members believe he is a god with supernatural powers. They follow him into the world of cold-blooded murder.
Torture and subjecting the unwilling to human sacrifice are the most extreme forms of violence. These are the acts I consider the most heinous on my scale of evil. But before I can place Constanzo on my scale, I must look at his entire life.
Constanzo is born in Miami in 1962. His Cuban mother is a priestess of the African religion Palo Mayombe. She believes that Constanzo is a chosen one, destined for greatness in the world of evil, and she grooms him for this future. At an early age, Constanzo is taught to torture and kill animals. He is praised for having no remorse. At 21, Constanzo is brought to the anganga, a large cauldron filled with the brew of murdered animals. This concludes his training as a Palo Mayombe priest.
Learning almost nothing but black magic and animal sacrifice since birth, it is clear that Constanzo's environment played a key role in who he would become. Raised by his mother to believe that he was destined for greatness, Constanzo developed megalomania. Desensitized to inflicting pain and confident in his own supernatural abilities, Constanzo had all the elements of a deadly cult leader.
1984, Constanzo sets up shop as a Palo Mayombe priest in Mexico City. He quickly gains a following, performing ritualistic cleansings and fortune tellings. Constanzo becomes a trusted advisor to wealthy drug kingpins. He tells them when it's safe to move their narcotics. They are unaware that Constanzo secretly pays off police for the privileged information. When their profits increase, he is praised for having supernatural powers. They treat him with extreme reverence, believing he is a godlike protector. They become students of his black magic religion and show their devotion by obeying his every command and turning over portions of their drug cartels. Growing rich and powerful, Constanzo quickly becomes more than a priest for hire. He leads his devoted followers into the world of human sacrifice. In 1988, Constanzo moves his worshippers to a remote ranch near the Texas border. He builds a temple in a small shed and orders his followers to bring him victims for human sacrifice rituals. Over the course of 2 years, Constanzo and his cult members brutally sacrificed 13 people in the dank human slaughterhouse. They target the poor and the criminal. These victims go largely unnoticed. But when they snatch Mark Kilroy, an American college student, everything changes. The media picks up on Kilroy's disappearance. When police find his body on Constanzo's ranch, they uncover details of his vicious cult.
The FBI joined in the search today for leaders of a drug smuggling cult that slaughtered at least 13 people in a Mexican border town.
Police corner Constanzo in Mexico City. A member of the cult shoots him dead.
Adolfo Constanzo did not simply commit murder. He compelled his followers to bring him victims to use in human sacrifice. The ritualized torture and the degree to which Constanzo enjoyed inflicting pain on his victims before killing them correspond in my scale of evil as some of the most heinous of crimes. For this reason, Adolfo Constanzo scores a 22 on my scale of evil. This is the highest category on the scale.
Next, science takes us inside the mind of a cult leader. Like Adolfo Constanzo, all cult leaders reveal their highly inflated egos, drawing in followers who will worship them as gods. Could this narcissism be linked to their violence?
Narcissists are fine as long as you praise them or treat them nicely, but as soon as you insult them or criticize them in any way, they become very defensive and very aggressive.
Dr. Brad Bushman, a senior research professor at the University of Michigan, theorizes that when a narcissist's ego is damaged, he is more prone to violence.
The sense of entitlement can be dangerous when you think you're better than other people.
To test his theory, Bushman conducts an experiment to find out what extremes narcissists will go to when they are insulted. Bushman looks for participants with the biggest egos using a series of multiple-choice questions.
Participants are forced to choose between one of two responses. For example, if I ruled the world, it would be a better place, versus the thought of ruling the world frightens the hell out of me.
Once Bushman identifies the narcissists,
Just want to come in and have a seat over here.
he asks them to write an essay. They are told that their essays will be graded by a partner they cannot see. In reality, there is no other partner. Their essays will be given a grade completely at random.
The experimenter then flips a coin. If it's a head, the experimenter writes an A on the paper along with the comment, great essay. If it's a tails, The experimenter writes an F on the essay along with the comment, "This is one of the worst essays I've ever read."
Okay, here's your partner's evaluation of your essay.
How will the narcissist react to a bad grade in comparison to the control group? To find out, Bushman gives all the participants that received an F an opportunity to confront the person they believe graded their exam.
You can't give people guns or knives or even boxing gloves. So in our studies, what we do is they have a chance to blast their partner with loud noise through a pair of headphones. And they get to choose the level of noise, as well as how long their partner suffers.
Narcissists consistently select excessively high noise levels, while the control group does not.
We'll look at the whole range of scores. The results of our study show that when narcissists get a good grade, they're not very aggressive, but when they get a bad grade, they set louder and longer noise blasts. Narcissistic people believe they're more deserving, they're entitled to special treatment. When they suffer a blow to their ego, when they're criticized or humiliated, they become very defensive, become very angry, and are likely to lash out and behave aggressively to others.
The link between narcissism and aggression can be further explored looking at the most infamous cult leader. Los Angeles, California, August 1969. Over the course of a weekend, police discover 7 bodies at 2 different crime scenes. Stabbed, shot, messages cut into their flesh and scrawled on walls in blood. They are wealthy, society elites, including Hollywood actress Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant with husband Roman Polanski's child. 3 months after the gruesome killings, investigators link the murders to a few young hippies living on an old movie set ranch on the edge of town. One admits in custody that the idea came from a man they follow as their leader, a self-proclaimed messiah named Charles Manson. Police are in disbelief. How could this scrawny, 5'2" criminal have the power to turn young people into savage killers?
Charles Manson is the perfect prototype of a brutal cult leader. He manipulates his followers to commit his violent crimes for him. When ordering members of his cults to kill, he asserts his power and his control, satisfying his megalomania. The pain and death that his victims suffer is evidence of his hatred towards society.
How does Charles Manson manipulate his cult members? Dr. Michael Stone is on his way to meet Catherine Scher, a one-time member of the Manson family.
Catherine Scher did not take part in the murders, yet she did live with him on the ranch, and I'm hoping she will give us rare insight into the mind of a cult leader who convinced his followers to commit murder for him as acts of devotion. So what do you think it was about him that conferred that power as you think back?
You know, sometimes he exuded all this love from his face. When he's smiling and his eyes are shining, he looks very benevolent. Everybody was drawn to him. None of us thought he was crazy. He was just fascinating. He was just totally confident. One-on-one with you, he would be very caring, would work on your inadequacies, your needs, help you take away your fears. Every night he would talk about what your parents did to you and that they were all wrong and you were the bright ones, and he just knew what people needed. He drew all our need out, and he became everything that we wanted.
Did he think of himself as godlike in some way, or a special being?
He never had to say so. He was real good at letting you come to that conclusion. He was really good into subliminal messages, talking about one thing and slipping in another. He must be Christ, he must be Christ, he must be Christ.
Yeah.
Mostly, I thought he was a prophet. I thought that he heard from God, and God spoke through him. That's what I thought.
How was Manson so convincing? Why do Manson's followers believe he is godlike? When we return.
Charles Manson is an extreme narcissist. To understand better how he develops into a manipulative and evil cult leader, I need first to look into his childhood.
Cincinnati, Ohio, 1934. Charles Manson begins his life as an unwanted pregnancy. He never knows his biological father. He gets the name Manson from a man who only briefly marries his troubled 16-year-old runaway mother. During his childhood, his mother often disappears for days or weeks at a time. Once, she trades him to a waitress for a pitcher of beer. His uncle tracks him down days later. At 12 years old, he is sent to his first of many reform schools. He is noticeably small and compensates by bullying others. At 13, he escapes reform school. His mother promptly returns him to the institution.
This is a defining moment of abandonment for the young Manson. He is a non-entity, discarded by both family and society.
Manson continues escaping from reform schools and begins committing increasingly violent crimes: car theft, armed robbery, sodomy. He spends 2 years in prison, then becomes a pimp, convincing girlfriends to turn tricks for him and scamming other women out of money. At 25, he breaks parole and is sentenced to another 10 years in prison. Having spent most of his life locked up, Manson feels rejected by the world. He schemes to retaliate by creating his own society, where he is loved as a leader. Released from jail at 32, Manson finds he can easily mix with the San Francisco hippie scene. He attracts naive young women looking to rebel. He chooses only those who seem vulnerable. He feeds them LSD and asks them to give up all thoughts, to follow him into a greater life. They mimic his actions to prove their loyalty. One such follower is Catherine Scher. Dr. Stone speaks with her about the experience.
You know, I just wanted to be loved so badly that I just became whatever any man that would pay some attention to me wanted me to be.
Scher meets Manson in the summer of 1968 when she is a 25-year-old hippie living in Los Angeles.
Charlie came up in a car and said, "Hey, let's all go swimming." And he looked me straight in the eyes and pierced my eyes and said, "This is your dream, girl. Start living it." And I was fascinated. I was definitely fascinated.
In 1968, a group of men and women follow Manson to live on an abandoned movie set outside Los Angeles. Catherine Scher is one of them.
When you isolate someone or a group of people, there's no newspapers, there's no television, there's no parents, there's no family. You have to, burn all bridges. He becomes, the newscaster, the prophet, the, father, mother, everything. It was never a discussion. There was no discussions going on. It was us soaking up, almost like little birds with their mouths open, tell us more, feed us. He'd talk about what's going to happen in the future and things that are going to happen and prophetic things.
Each night, Manson preaches Armageddon, telling followers they must be loyal to him or they will not survive. They believe he can save them from the apocalypse.
He was not teaching that we're going to go and kill people. He was teaching survival. It's a blueprint for every cult that's ever been. Your leader is the only one that has the in with God and knows what's going to go on, and if you don't follow, then you're not going to survive it.
But in August of 1969, Manson's thoughts turned deadly.
He was just stealing everyone's soul.
When we return. How does Charles Manson manipulate his followers? Dr. Stone interviews Catherine Scher, a former Manson family cult member.
But was there a period of time when your tendency to think was expunged?
He would, first of all, put you down in front of everybody for thinking. He'd say, thinking is stinking. But he was just stealing everyone's soul to the point where they couldn't even form a thought.
When mind control doesn't work, Manson turns to violence for control. Catherine, known in the camp as Gypsy, is called to meet with Manson and another follower named Clem.
And he looked at Clem and says, Clem, would you do anything for me? And Clem said, sure, you know I would. So this is what I want you to do. If Gypsy tries to leave, I want you to hunt her down, find her, tie her behind a car, and drag her. Don't kill her, just drag her all the way back to Spawn Ranch, slowly. Would you do that for me, brother? And Clem grinned and said, sure. Then he looked at me and said, Gypsy, are you going anywhere? And I said, no.
In August of 1969, Manson proves his power as a cult leader. He asks 4 followers to commit the ultimate act of devotion. After arming them with knives, he sends them into strangers' homes. Their orders are to prove their loyalty. He tells them, if you're going to do something, leave something witchy. They take that to mean bloody slaughter. 7 people are murdered. Catherine Scher is convinced that her fellow cult members were so deep under Manson's spell that they had no idea what they were doing.
I do not believe they had any knowledge of what they were about to do or where they were going to go.
Until the last moment.
Until they walked onto that. They were so programmed by then to do exactly what they were told.
Brainwashed and
just
under
brainwashed completely, to the point where they had no will of their own left.
When Manson and his cult members are captured, a media frenzy ensues. The nation is bewildered by the young women who worship this small, crazy-eyed criminal. Catherine Scher remains loyal to Manson throughout the trial and protests his incarceration.
How can you say that there's no question of his innocence unless you were with him at the time and it was somewhere else?
Well, the newspapers now are dropping the word alleged. I can say anything I want to say.
She openly displays her loyalty with bizarre acts of devotion.
This was a crawl that we made. He gave us acid and said he wanted us to do that. And we crawled on our hands and knees all the way from the Sunset Strip to the courthouse. And I didn't think anybody took pictures of it. Very short hair. There I am.
What seemed to be the meaning of that?
To show the devotion that we had to Charles Manson.
It took years for Catherine Scher to break out of Manson's control. But now, at 64, she no longer calls him her leader.
My eyes started opening and I started seeing that he was a user, and he was a liar, and he was a coward.
Manson has come to represent most people's picture of evil. But he himself does not commit the acts of torture and violence necessary to reach the highest level of my scale. Manson's evil acts come in the form of manipulation and control of the people who commit the murders. Because he never actually kills the victims, in the Tate LaBianca case, but only influences others to do so, I place him near the top of my scale, but not at the top. Charles Manson is a psychopathic murderer with a narcissistic compulsion to be worshipped. He ranks at level 15 on my scale of evil.
California abolishes the death penalty in 1972, and the Manson family's sentences are commuted to life in prison. But Manson, now in his 70s, still manages to attract the desperate and naive, an icon for hate groups and the morally bankrupt. The spell broken, Catherine Scher has given us a first-hand account of how a cult leader, like Charles Manson, can shepherd an entire community into acts of violence. Cult leader Jim Jones manipulates followers into mass suicide. When we return. Cult leaders prey on the unsuspecting, vulnerable seeker and exploit their innermost needs. Charles Manson's followers proved their devotion by committing murder. But will brainwashed cult members go further? Will they kill themselves? November 18th, 1978, Guyana, South America. 909 American citizens lie dead in the rainforest. They are members of the People's Temple, a San Francisco-based church. Their leader is Jim Jones, a Christian minister turned political socialist.
Why do you keep playing with that which men call God and we call socialism incarnate? I'm a liberator, I'm a savior.
The cult moves to Guyana to create a utopia. But when several members of the People's Temple try returning to the States, Jones wants everyone dead. He orders all members to kill themselves by drinking cyanide. 909 people die. Did he become a leader so respected that all his followers would take their own lives? For answers, Dr. Stone turns to Tim Carter, one of only 4 people who left Jonestown alive.
You're a rare survivor of what started out as a utopia that ended up a dystopia. Let's begin with Jones ordering everyone into the pavilion.
The sky turned black, and on my life, I am telling the truth. It literally felt like evil itself flew into Jonestown.
Carter maintains what took place on that dark day was not exclusively suicide. It was also murder.
Number one, children don't commit suicide. In terms of children and seniors and the number of people that were injected, were over 600 people. How many people drank poison because they thought that what Jones was saying was the truth? You know, I think this is a much smaller number. Even though it should have been absolutely obvious to me what was going on, it wasn't, because the part of me was going, no, this can't be happening. This isn't real. This doesn't make any sense. This doesn't compute on any level. You do not kill everybody because some people wanted to leave this community.
Carter attempts to outwit Jones and save his family, including his wife and 15-month-old son, Malcolm. But he is too late.
So I go back up to the pavilion, and I turn to my right, and Malcolm is having poison squirted into his mouth. There were screams of horror. There were screams of agony. You know, Jones even confirms it on the tape.
For God's sakes, let's get on with it. We've lived as no other people have lived and loved. We've had as much of this world as you're going to get. Let's just be done with it. Let's be done with the agony of it.
The look on Gloria's face, with tears streaming down her face, was trapped. Trapped. And no way out. And I felt rage towards her. Why aren't you doing anything? I felt complete guilt.
Carter's wife dies in his arms. holding their dead child. He now looks back, wishing he had seen it all coming.
I can look back now on things that were clearly red flags. Not even yellow flags, but red flags. And I chose to rationalize and ignore those red flags, which is very painful for me to live with. Very much so.
Jim Jones takes his own life that day. His legacy, Jonestown, is the world's largest cult-related massacre. The death toll of 909 is proof of how dangerous the mind of a cult leader can be.
Carter's testimony about murder as being the cause of death at Jonestown greatly affects how I place Jim Jones on my scale of evil. Previously, when believing that all the deaths at Jonestown were a result of suicide, even if it was compelled by Jones, I placed him at a level 12. But if Jones and his executioners systematically murdered hundreds in a premeditated slaughter, as Tim Carter has revealed, then I must reevaluate. I place those executioners that injected people with cyanide against their will at a level 15. But I put Jim Jones higher on the scale. Like Manson and Asahara, Jones seems not to have physically killed anyone himself, but the hundreds of deaths that he encouraged assigns him a greater responsibility. As the cold-blooded designer of this mass death scene that took the lives of more than 900 people, Jim Jones falls at the top of my scale at a 22.
Deadly, ruthless. Cult leaders tear apart the lives of their loyal followers and the victims they target. Dr. Michael Stone has given us insight into the psychology behind a cult leader's vicious mind. He will continue to investigate and study what makes a killer most evil.
It could be happening right now, somewhere hidden, lit only by candlelight.